Completing the square. Solve the quadratic equation by completing the square. X squared plus 2x equals 48. To complete the square, you want all of your x terms to be on one side of the equal sign, and then the constant terms to be on the right side of the equal sign. So our problem is already in that form. Next, you want to take your middle term and divide by 2. So the coefficient of our middle term is a 2, and we're going to divide it by 2 and then square it. So this becomes 1 squared, which is the number 1. Next, we'll add that number to both sides of the equal sign. Now, the left side, this x squared plus 2x plus 1, should be a perfect square. So we're going to write it as a perfect square by making one parenthesis with an exponent of 2. And then to find out the term inside of the parenthesis, all you do is you take the square root of the first term. So the square root of x squared is x. Then you take the square root of the last term. The square root of 1 is 1. And then you keep the middle sign, which is a plus sign. Now that I factored that side into a perfect square, I can set it equal to 48 plus 1. And 48 plus 1 is 49. Next, I'll use the square root property to get rid of the exponent of 2. So I need to take the square root of both sides. And remember, whenever I take the square root of a number, I need to put a plus minus sign next to the square root bar. The square root of x plus 1 squared is just the x plus 1, and that equals the plus or minus square root 49. Next, we can subtract 1 from both sides to isolate the x, and I'm left with x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 49. Now the square root of 49 is 7, because 7 times 7 is 49. So I can reduce this to x equaling negative 1 plus or minus 7. Since there's a plus or minus sign there, I really have two equations or two solutions. So I'm going to write this as x equals negative 1 plus 7 and x equals negative 1 minus 7. So x equaling negative 1 plus 7 is 6, and then negative 1 minus 7 is a negative 8. So my solutions are x equals negative 8 and x equals 6. Solve the quadratic equation by completing the square. X squared plus 6x plus 4 equals 0. To complete the square, I want to isolate the x squared and the x terms. So I'm going to subtract the 4 from both sides of the equation. When I subtract the 4, I get x squared plus 6x equals negative 4. Now I'm going to complete the square. To do that, you take the coefficient in front of the x term, which is a 6, and then divide by 2, and then we'll square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. So that means that I'm going to add 9 to both sides of my equal sign. Now I need to rewrite the left side into a perfect square. To do that, take the square root of x squared. Square root of x squared is just x. Then take the square root of the last term, which is a 9. The square root of 9 is 3. Then keep the middle term, which is a plus sign. And this equals negative 4 plus 9. Negative 4 plus 9 is a positive 5. Now I need to get rid of the exponent of 2 by taking the square root of both sides. And we'll put the plus minus sign in front of the square root bar when taking the square root of 5. The square root of x plus 3 squared is just the term within parentheses, which is x plus 3. And I'm going to set it equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. Lastly, we'll subtract 3 on both sides. And I have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 5. Now the square root of 5 cannot be reduced any further, so I'm going to leave it as is. Now I can separate these numbers by separating the plus and minus sign. So I really have two solutions, and my two solutions are x equals negative 3 plus square root 5 and x equals negative 3 minus square root 5. So I just separated those two by commas so you could see that there's two separate solutions to this problem.